Hey guys, it's Ollie from Rad Season. I'm stoked to be joined today by adventurer, fundraiser, motivational speaker on a mission to take on some of the hardest and craziest adventure challenges in the world, Josh Stinton. Josh, thanks for coming on the show, mate.
Ollie, good to see you.
You too. So you're based over you're in Oslo in Norway at the moment, right?
I've been in Norway for just over 3 years now. I was on the west coast in Stavanger for a couple of years, and now in Oslo for about a year and a half.
Okay. And what have you been up to over there?
Mate, I'm like this walking poster child for Norway, right? I adore this country so much. Like, my family comes from here originally, so I grew up with these heartstring attachment. Like, as an American kid, I was a Viking 7 years in a row for Halloween until my father actually told me that our ancestors are the ones that made the sandwiches for the Warriors, and then I knocked that off. But shifted over here, and I'm doing loads of training and preparation for the next challenge that's coming up, which is going to be Norwegian produced and actually done here in Norway. And yeah, just hanging out and absolutely loving life and eating far too much fish.
I heard it's pretty good over there, though.
Incredible, absolutely incredible. Yeah, the culture, people, country, mate, I absolutely love it. I'm home here in Norway. I love it. So awesome. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Cool, man. Well, I guess I'd love to take it back to the beginning and where you grew up, because you're originally from Colorado, is that right?
That's right, Colorado. So yeah, started there. It's funny too, because you kind of picture these environments like Colorado, born and raised outside of Denver, Colorado, in the Swedish Memorial Hospital. Funnily enough, don't know why there's a Swedish Memorial Hospital in the middle of the U.S., but that's where I came from. And but in an environment like Colorado, it's such an adventuring kind of capital, you know, like Boulder and skiing and all that. And I've got to be honest, I had nothing to do with it when I was younger. I didn't have a background of the adventuring stuff. I was kind of a lazy kid. So it was always good being around stuff. And like, we've actually had the opportunity to cross paths in Australia before, and you know, really, really fun kind of adventurous places. And I've always liked being around it, but I was never that much into it when I was younger. So there's kind of changed as the story went on.
And what about sports? I mean, were you kind of growing up doing sports, like either, you know, like team sports at school and clubs and things like that?
Yeah, in sixth grade, I was on the chess club. That was pretty fun. And actually, in high school, I just moved. So I was born in Colorado, and I moved to Washington State for high school. So I started my first high school freshman year. Joined the football team. That was my first time being on any sports at all. So I wasn't that big into sports as a kid. So I don't have this like athletic background by any means. And I joined the football team, American football team, you know, gridiron team in ninth grade. And because I thought it'd be a good way to make friends. And halfway through the season, Ollie, the coach pulled me aside and said, just to let you know, the team and I have kind of made a decision that you'd probably make a better cameraman than you would a football player. So I was a cameraman for the rest of the team. I got kicked off because I sucked.
You're kidding.
So yeah, not a big like shining accolade history of sports endeavors prior to.
Yeah, I was just curious to see, you know, if it was sort of like, you know, if you were climbing trees as a 3-year-old and doing all this crazy adventure stuff, kind of like back then.
You know what? It wasn't so much like in terms of like the physical adventures. I mean, I was as playful as the next kid, right? But for me, like, I had always been really big on figuring out how to bring big ideas to life. Like that's been a bit of a red thread through my entire life now, 39 years, and just constantly finding like something to play with, and then figuring out ways to bring stuff to life. And I've done that in various shapes and sizes throughout my life, but how it kind of shifted into the physical side with these big physical challenges was a bit of an evolution in the process over the past 6 years.
Okay, and you were studying and you went to college in Washington. Was that kind of where you went sort of after Colorado?
Yeah, that's it, man. So I went to community college in South Puget Sound, just south of Seattle, Washington.
Okay.
So yeah, so I went to school there, and that was actually kind of one of the initial bits, right? Like, because I knew I wanted to move to Australia. I'd never been to Australia and didn't know anybody there, but I wanted to transfer there. And when I found out I couldn't just buy a plane ticket and move there, I obviously had to have a visa, and the longest visa I could get was a study visa. So that's why I went to school, full disclosure. And then and that was actually one of the things that started it, because when I went to that community college at South Puget Sound, I wanted to transfer from there to a university in Sydney, but they didn't have any connections. So I had to work. I volunteered myself. I haven't thought about this in a long time. I volunteered my time 2 nights a week to work with the international offices between the two schools to create a relationship. So then I could actually transfer over to Australia. So I helped them, and that relationship still stands. There's still an exchange program in that uni, and I helped them develop it so I selfishly could go to Australia.
And that was with Macquarie, is that right? Like,
that's it. That's okay. Right.
Nice. And why, like, what was the fascination with Australia? Why did you want to move there?
It was like, in the US? And I, inherently I'm a bit of a lazy person, so I didn't have to learn a new language at the time to go to Australia. And sun. I'm a Colorado boy, so I grew up around mountains, and I always just fantasized about Sydney, and it paid off. I mean, and you well know, it's such an incredible spot. So yeah, I went over there. I was just going to go over there for a couple of years, or a few years and study, and then ended up being 13 years on when I moved over here.
That's crazy. Yeah, I mean, I went over there. I studied there after university. I went in the UK, and then I did a year on the Gold Coast. I was doing a thing called surfing studies. It was, if you can believe that, it was sports management surfing studies, which was unreal. And then
seriously, that was a legitimate reason for a gap in my CV. It was surfing studies. But, yeah.
It was crazy. And then I thought, okay, I did that. Kind of got a bit of a guilt trip that I should be getting a real job afterwards.
Yeah.
Came back to Europe and then did a few years in London, and then just thought, what, I want to go back over there, and ended up moving to Sydney. And sort of similar to you, like spent a few years over there and
give it a shot.
Yeah, that's it, man. And then so what was your first job after when you graduated, or after Macquarie University?
So actually what I did is I got into events. So I started producing these corporate conferences for really sexy subjects like coal seam methane and carbon finance. Yeah. And so I was in this event production space, but through that kind of loosely, I got connected to the people at TEDx Sydney.
Okay.
And I was on the TEDx Sydney team when we were at the Opera House. So I was on the production team for TEDx Sydney for 3 years. And so that was really cool actually. And that's when a lot of these dangerous ideas started coming to life, right? And when you think, okay, because they say, you never want to be the smartest person in the room. And I never had that problem working with the TED team. And you have different people sharing these big ideas all the time and talking about how to bring things to life. And it just started to kind of get into the fabric. And it was like, there must be other ways to play. And even though I didn't realize that, certainly back then, that I would be up to the stuff that I'm up to now, but that really started to plant some seeds early on. And then from TEDx Sydney, I got to meet some people through this business design world that I've been working on. I still do some work in it now. I'm working with corporates on the big 4 firms usually on business design. So how to help organizations solve complex problems. So from that side of my world, I got a lot of modeling, like future state scenario planning and really being playful with how to solve complex problems for clients. And I just started to kind of learn from that. And I use a lot of those models now in bringing these crazy adventures to life. And a lot of the talks that I give and coaching that I do actually do take from a kind of a mix from these models that I've learned, and then also from the adventures and the stories. Because I got to be honest, man, there's so many men and women out there that are proper adventurers. And if I had to make a living on stories just based off of my adventure skill, I'd be a very hungry person. I invented along the way.
So it was 5 years ago when you thought, okay, you're going to set out on your first challenge, which was to go on a cross-country or 90-kilometer cross-country skiing event in Vasaloppet in Sweden.
Yeah.
With, I guess the background of not ever having skied before.
Which is ridiculous.
How did that come about, man? I know you probably talked about this quite a bit, but I was just curious to see, where was that idea thinking, all right, okay, I'm going to do that. And
it's funny. So for people listening up to this point, they're like, well, hang on, he's from Colorado and he's never skied. That makes my story in itself ridiculous, but it's true. Like I lived in kind of further south in Colorado and didn't make it up to the slopes much as a kid, and at all, and never skied. And then And how this came about was I was in a conversation at Beach's Pizza in Manly, just outside of with a good friend of mine named Ollie, and he was off to go and do he said he was going to go do the hardest ski race in the world called Vasaloppet. It's like, what is that about? And so it's a 90-kilometer ski race. It's actually like the biggest ski race that we have in Scandinavia. It's kind of the crown jewel for a skiing career. And I heard about, like, he was talking about this, and I was like, I want to try it. And he's like, you what? Like, you've never skied? I'm like, yeah, I know, but I'd like to give it a shot. And it was just kind of a silly conversation. And I mean, I was known amongst the guys as, you know, I bought 4 tickets to half marathons, and I sold all the bibs like 3 days before. So I was like, I'm not gonna do that. And so he was like, yeah. So my buddy's like, yeah, okay, well, you're gonna do this race. Like, all right, just hang into it. And so I committed to doing the race. It was kind of my ego that signed me up for it. And shortly after that, I met a good friend of mine named James Thomas. And he and his wife were starting a small charity called Field of Magic, which is an Australian charity that was set to help children living with grief. So if they lost a parent or, you know, a loved one, they had a grief counseling camp that helped these kids learn that they weren't alone. But it was only a new charity, so they didn't have a lot of marketing dollars. They didn't have, you know, it was a very beginning program for them. So I kind of put 2 and 2 together. I was like, you know, because I'm familiar with the concept of, you know, run a marathon or a half marathon and raise money for X, which is fantastic. Yeah. So I said, okay, well, I'll do similar. I said, I've been talking to my other friend about taking on the hardest ski race in the world. Maybe I could support you guys. And he was like, okay, mate, like, we'll give you a t-shirt. Like, sure, good luck. And it's like, yeah, great. And they're super supportive and very helpful. And so I got this t-shirt, signed up for the race. It took me 2 years to get a ticket because there's 16,000 people that do the race every year. And if you've never skied before, you're not like super high up on the list of people that they. And but I eventually got a ticket, and then I Googled how to train for cross-country skiing on land. So I lived in Sydney, and there's no snow, obviously. So
I saw some photos of you know, with these kind of on-land skis, kind of look like inline blades.
Yeah, exactly. There's like, they're like, you know, about that long, wheels on either end, called roller skis. Super common here in Scandinavia, I can tell you. I mean, you see them all the time in summer. Not common in Australia. So I got these roller skis from a group called Roller Ski Australia. It's 2 Norwegian women that import these roller skis. Met them, and they helped me out getting the gear. Super lovely. And there I was every day out there before work, like roller skiing up and down the beaches in Sydney. And it was it took a long time to kind of get my legs ready for it, but got there in the end. That's kind of how it. Yeah.
And how did it all go? I mean, like, how long were you training for before you got over there? And
yeah, so I trained. So they connected me. So the Roller Ski Australia team actually connected me with a woman named Barbara Jezersek, who also lives in Sydney. So she's from Slovenia. She's an Olympic cross-country skier, and she's living there in Sydney. And they connected us. And so Barbara reached out and said, look, I've heard about your program. I'd like to train with you. I'll train with you on these roller skis for, it was like, I think she offered like 30 odd minutes or something from memory. And so we got out there, and mate, it was like 5 minutes into training. She stopped. She said, "You're horrible." I'm like, yeah, I know. Like, I've never skied. She's like, "You've never skied and you're going to do Vasaloppet." I said, "Yeah." She's like, "But you look like a young Bambi on these things." I'm like, okay, I got it. Like, I got it. I'm not no. And she offered, she said, "I will train with you twice a week for the next 5 months at that point until the race to help you get into shape." So I trained with an Olympic cross-country skier twice a week for 5 months to get me ready for it. So then got to the starting line. So, I mean, I had my how. And there's the other thing is that, as I'd never been in the media before for virtually anything. And that started to gain some interest because I was roller skiing around Sydney so much. This woman stopped me one day and asked what I was up to. I always had this charity t-shirt on, and she asked for like an interview. She's like, you know, obviously you're out here doing this for something. And I said, yes. Well, I'd love an interview. I'm actually doing this to try. I'm going to do the hardest ski race in the world to support my friend's small charity. And she's like, brilliant. So that was in the Manly Daily. That interview came out that the next day, the following day, I got a phone call from the Today Show asking if that was real, like if that's, they were fact checking, and they asked me onto the show, and that TV interview went really well. They gave me 7 minutes in the morning, which is a lot of real estate on live television. And that interview made its way back to the Norwegian Olympic ski team, world champion skiers. This is actually brilliant because I'm at home. I'd like to show you this. So they send me the Norwegian Olympic
so good.
And they met me and they said, we know you're not even going to know how to wax your own skis, so we'll meet you at the race. I'm like, wax skis? And they're like, yeah, you're going to need help. So I actually got sponsored, all my gear sponsored by the world champion Olympic ski team in Norway. Met me at the start line, started to raise money. All the interviews were going well. And here I was, minus 17 degrees Celsius, 7 o'clock in the morning at the start line in Sälen, Sweden, surrounded by 15,999 people that know how to ski, and me. And that was the first time I ever had my feet on skis in my life. And there was an ABBA cover band pumping up the crowd, which was cool. It's Sweden. It was brilliant. But yeah, and the gun went off. And the first thing I did, because I'd never skied before, is I hit the guy right in front of me. I just wrapped the poor guy up, this older guy, and he stops and he kind of looks back and he says something in Swedish. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, mate, I've never skied. Like, Olympic team suit from Norway. And Vasaloppet, he goes, this is Vasaloppet, you've never skied. I'm like, no. And he said, today's going to be the longest day of your life. I was like, yeah, I know, man. I just have to go that way. He's like, yeah, for a long time. So 11 hours, 8 minutes, and 58 seconds of nonstop skiing. And you have to complete the race in 13 hours. So I actually got a record for that, a world record in terms of that race, because I'm the first person in the race's history to ever complete the race without ever having skied before. So it happened.
So funny.
Yeah.
And that kind of, was that the start of the whole notion of being called, or like known as the charity adventurer? And I guess that like it pretty much changed the direction of your life, right? Doing that.
100%. That day did change my life. It was one of the best days of my life. And it was fun, especially once I got north of, further than 60, 70K, because then I really felt like I could complete the thing. Mm-hmm. And then completing it. And I remember I was actually in a conversation with my mom shortly after, and she said, well, now that you've done this, because off the back of that, there was a lot more TV interviews, media, like newspaper and all sorts of stuff. And over 200 families signed up for the charity that didn't know that it existed before. And so that's 200 kids that are now a part of a grief counseling camp that are getting friends and assistance and help with living with their grief. And I was talking with my mom about it, and she said, well, you realize that you've tripped onto something that this isn't an opportunity anymore, it's a responsibility. You've kind of found an interesting niche. I was like, yeah, right. And then I was in a conversation shortly after with a friend of mine that asked what the next challenge was. And I said, I'd heard some random story about these guys that are taking unicycles down mountains, this sport from Canada called mountain unicycling. And no joke, this is in Sydney. This guy, Charlie, I just met him at this dinner. I was at his house, and his eyes got massive. And he's like, how did you hear about Muni? Like, well, and he's like, mountain unicycling. I was like, oh, I don't know. I just read about this thing. Wait a second. He goes into another room of the house, comes back out with a mountain unicycle. Like, and he changed his shirt. I'm like, what is this? It said NBUC on it. I said, what's that? And he said, Northern Beaches Unicycle Club. I'm the president. We'll teach you how to. And so in 4 months' time, I was representing Australia in the world's largest off-road mountain unicycle race, 14 kilometers down a mountain in Spain.
Wow. And were you going around like Manly Dam and stuff, or like how were you?
That was exactly it. I was going around Manly Dam. So, like the Strava running app?
Yeah.
I was using Strava to count like how well I was going with it, and Strava doesn't have a mountain unicycle option for the sport, so I was using jogging, and I was just tracking that, going around Manly Dam, and then learning how to kind of go over logs, and then down stairs, and then up some stairs, and I was falling all over the place, but it was brilliant fun. And yeah, and that took me, so on that challenge, that was challenge number 2. That took me, it was an hour and 45 minutes to get down the mountain on one wheel. And I did certainly fall a few times, which is fine. But I didn't come last. I came 5th from last out of 300 people, which I'm super excited about.
And you were competing for Australia.
I was.
Doing that event, right?
Yeah, actually, it might take me a second to look for it, so I won't waste our time. But I've got a shirt that it says Australia, and it's got a kangaroo with a wheel underneath it. That's the jersey I was wearing.
And when you were training, I mean, were you going out like every day along the beaches and stuff? And
absolutely, yeah. And I was really glad I hit one point, because again, for every single one of these challenges, it's got to be to raise awareness and funds for a children's cause. That's my given. And I 100% of every dollar or whatever nominated currency gets raised, 100% always goes to the cause. And when I was training for that mountain unicycle race, there was one day I was kind of flagging a little bit in my training, because it's not easy to learn how to ride a unicycle in 4 odd months, let alone downstairs and whatnot. And I put it out on Facebook. I said, if I can raise 1,500 Australian dollars within a week, I will ride my unicycle wearing only budgie smugglers down Manly Promenade on a Saturday during the markets. And I ended up raising almost $3,000 out of that. I was like, shit. So off I went, live streamed it on Facebook, and then that's again, it's just so much fun just doing something kind of ridiculous, and then putting it out there and just raising money for these kids. It's super good.
That's cool, man. Yeah, I mean, then going from there, so doing those 2 events, were you like, okay, like, how am I gonna how are you gonna up it? But like, were you sort of scheming during the year when you were training, or did you like what happened then?
Yeah, and back to the charity adventurer part, because that kind of came about accidentally. So for the mountain unicycle race, I was invited back onto the Today Show, and when I went out, they said, "All right, they said the charity adventurer is back with us." I was like, "The charity adventurer?" They said it live, and I was like, "Oh, okay, we'll go with that." And then it just stuck, and then it was like a week later, there was another newspaper article that came out, and it said Manly Charity Adventure, because I lived on Manly Beach. So that was a super cool title to see. But Manly Charity Adventure at another challenge, and I was like, and it just stuck. So yeah, it's been really, really fun since. So, but as you said, it's always constantly now, because it's such a big thing in my world, the wheels are constantly spinning on different ways to play, basically. And so that's kind of the model is, it's got to be something that I really don't know how to do, or actually now I'm in this space of things that have never been done before ever. And always and then showing, so via social media and all that stuff, just basically showing how these things come to life, just to prove, I mean, if some dude from a small town that like myself can do these things, I'm the guy that got kicked off the football team, not athletic at all. If I can pull these things off, then anybody can. So I'm just showing basically how I bring stuff to life.
That's awesome, man. And what was, so when you went on from doing that, was that when you were looking into Japan and
there was
cycling? Was there?
So there was one more in between, and it was the hardest mountain bike race in the world across the Arctic, up in far north Norway in Alta. And that was like
700K or something, isn't it?
Yeah, it was 700K. And it is dubbed the hardest mountain bike race in the world. And man, they mean it. Like, they're lovely people, those organizers, but not when it comes to organizing races. Those things, like, they start the race at 6 o'clock at night just to mess with you. And because it's the middle of summer in the Arctic, the sun doesn't go down. So it was in July, and like the sun never set. So it could have been 4 a.m, could have been noon, you didn't know. And on top of that, there's a thing about the Arctic that people don't talk about, and they should, which is Arctic mosquitoes. Man, they're like aggressive little birds, and they're just constantly on you at all times. And it's just like you're covered in mosquitoes. And riding, ended up riding for 39 hours nonstop and climbed 3,600 meters. Actually climbed 2 glaciers as well in the process. And and didn't even finish it. That was the first thing I've never finished. I got to the 3rd check mark. I was in a team of 3. So Tommy and Charlie, the other 2 buddies, we were in a team of 3, got to the 3rd check mark at 200 kilometers, and we were about an hour and a half over. So we got disqualified from finishing. So I was,
oh, no way.
I was pretty beaten up about that, but that challenge was to help these children that are from Syria living in Lebanon now. So it was helping Syrian children and Lebanese children with different systems of care in this new home environment for them in the area in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. And there was one girl that raised enough money to help a lot of kids, but there was one girl in particular, her name's Ritaj, a 6-year-old girl that had cancer. I was able to raise enough money to get her surgery. It's $20,000 and actually got her surgery and saved her little life. And I've got her name tattooed here on my arms, Ritaj al-Mufasa in Arabic, just to remind me how important these things actually are on a regular basis. So didn't complete the race, saved a life, job done. So
that's it, man.
Thank you for that.
Nice. And
yeah,
and so then you were you sort of looking at I guess going into that cycling sort of mindset of like what kind of cycling events around, or what kind of challenges could you set yourself?
You're giving me credit for coming up with something in a logical pattern, and I didn't have that.
I'm trying to understand the mind, like the thought process. Were you just like, was there a flow kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, what happened? So how it kind of moved on was so that was the third challenge. So doing the mountain bike race up in the Arctic, and then I had an interview. This was on ABC News in Australia, and someone watching this interview reached out and connected me to someone else on LinkedIn. And they said, we'd like you to meet this guy. He's running a small charity helping children in Japan, like all across Japan, from all of the ongoing issues with the natural disasters there, because families are getting displaced left, right, and center. Because there's over 150 earthquakes in Japan a year. I didn't realize that. And so I connected with him, and he's a lovely guy named Michael. And he said that he's heading up this small charity called Apricot Children, and he wanted to know if I'd be interested to do like a bike race across Japan and against him. And he got me on this kind of competitive edge. He's like, would you like to do a bike race? He said, I know of a Paralympian that might be interested in coming to Japan from England and racing you across Japan. So you'll have someone in a hand cycle and you on a bicycle. To where I said, I thought the idea was interesting. For one, I'm not a very competitive person, so my whole angle isn't like to compete against someone else and beat them to the finish line. That's not really my thing. And so I'm not really into the competing thing. And he came back and said, good, because I wasn't convinced that I was going to be able to get this Paralympian over anyway. I said, okay. So, but tell me more about this hand cycle. And he's like, well, that's like this sport that this Paralympian uses in Britain. I said, okay. So I looked into hand cycling. I thought, that's fascinating. I said, okay. And I looked into it further, and no one had crossed Japan on a hand cycle the entire length. So I went back to him and said, what if I cross like hand cycle? So like literally, like your legs are locked out and it's just your arms like powering yourself along. And I said, what if I get a hand cycle and start in the furthest southern point of Japan and hand cycle all the way to Cape Soya, the furthest northern point. So it's like 2,112 kilometers. And I said, to raise awareness for you guys. And he's like, would you? Like, yeah. So that was it, locked in. It took me a year and a half to actually almost 2 years to put that together. So that was happening in the background before the mountain bike race had happened. And so that was the next one. So it took me 22 days of hand cycling nonstop. And it was about 11 hours a day. And I hand cycled 2,112 kilometers across the entire country, all 3 big islands of Japan.
Wow. I've got a clip of it here. Do you mind if I pull it up?
Please do.
If you could run us through it, that'd be awesome.
Some anxiety. Depends on the ones we've got. Systems. So there was that's such a silly video. So there was a route that goes kind of through the middle of Japan. Like now we're talking big island, Honshu. And that was very mountainous. And obviously that's not like less elevation gain, the better when I'm going over such a long distance. So the other one was right along the west coast and then it switches over mid-island over to the East Coast, and then to go up to the northern part of Japan. And there's a guy named Egon, a guy from New Zealand, that's on a cycle team called the Knights in White Lycra, based in Japan. And these guys reached out and offered to help me design the route to take. And they said, look, this one's not going to be as pretty. You're going to be on the highways most of the time. Semis going by you at a regular rate, but that's going to be the flattest. I said, I'll take that one. And no joke, the majority of days at the vantage point of like a 3-year-old, I was like this high off the ground, just going along, and this semi trucks are shooting by going like 70K an hour with their hubcaps like right at my face. But don't try this at home, kids. But it was a cool way to see Japan.
That's amazing. And what was what was the reception like when you were going through, all these, like when you're going through the whole country? I mean, you must have been going into some pretty like little towns and villages and stuff. Yeah. And
loads. It was so good, like so incredibly lovely. Like all across the country, people were just so lovely. Because I mean, obviously there wasn't a lot of English speaking there, and I don't understand. Like I can't speak Japanese at all. So I had these flyers printed that said in Japanese what I was doing and why I was doing it. Yeah. And people, like, you'd go to like petrol stations or wherever to pull in for a bit of food, and people would read them. They're like, what, and just just absolutely thought it was super fun. And I a number of times, without me even explaining what I was doing to anyone, this happened on 4 occasions. I'm just hand cycling along some random highway, and a car would go by, and shortly after, that same car would come back around and stop a little ways in front of me. And the guy, this happened with 4 different guys. The guy would come out with a couple of energy drinks just to help, just because he'd see me hand cycling along the road. I mean, just super lovely across the entire country. Absolutely amazing. I've got a huge soft spot in my heart for Japan. That's cool. That's another thing about the Japanese, man. I mean, talk about resilience. I mean, you see it in action, with the tsunami, the big tsunami that hit, March 2008, that did significant damage, and still in the Sendai region, prefecture where that took place, they're still rebuilding. But there's things that happen all the time, and they're one of the strongest, most driven, dedicated, lovely cultures that I've been fortunate enough to interact with. So I gained so much from that. Every 22 of those days, I met someone new and incredible.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And where did you go from Japan? So when you got back, were you then back in Australia? And
at that time, I was in Norway. So I was living in Norway, got back, and not long after coming back to Norway, I was invited to give a talk in Mexico. Mm-hmm. So I flew over to Mexico and had a keynote talk there, and it was an adventure company there. And so I got to give this talk, and in the audience, there was a couple of guys that came up afterwards and said that they were going to charter a yacht and sail from Gran Canaria, Spain, Spanish Canary Islands, over to St. Lucia in the Caribbean. And they just asked if I wanted to join them. It's like, yeah, this is actually their teams, the Diablesas, like the Mexican yacht racing team is actually the shirt. That's funny. But one of my favorite shirts. But so they invited me to join the sailing ship. And I said, look, to be honest, I've never sailed in my life, but I'm not probably going to add an immense amount of value, but we'll try. And I said, absolutely. I was just honored that they asked. And as the night kind of progressed on, I did share with them. I said, one thing that I had in the back of my mind that I thought would be pretty silly to do is put like this is as simple as I am. I said, put like a training bike from a gym onto a shipping container and cycle on the shipping container the same amount of miles that the container is traveling every day. And these guys are like, we could probably get a bike on the ship. I was like, yeah, actually maybe. And so they put me in touch with the guy's name is Matt. He's become a good friend, and I'm working with Matt, the captain of that ship, on my next challenge as well. But Matt, he was less in the vision and playful idea space. He's a captain of the ship. He was practical. It was a proper sailing yacht. And he's like, mate, you're not going to be able to just strap a bike down onto a boat and take it across the sea. You're going to blow your knees out. Like, the boat is at any given time 45 degrees. Basically, this is stupid. But maybe. And I was like, yeah. So how could we do it? And he was just, I mean, he was on board with it like straight away, but he was a necessity of rationale for me that I usually don't have. And so he's like, let me go away and have a think about it, and I'll come back. And he went away and he scratched up on a napkin basically the blueprint for an ocean-going bicycle gimbal. So this is a bike gimbal, like essentially like a hammock, so where no matter what the ship is doing underneath it, the bike stays straight in the air, suspended on it. So the bike, so the boat can be doing whatever else it wants to, but the bike stays in one spot. So I went on eBay. I'm not good at eBay, and I went on eBay and I accidentally bought a recumbent bike. I thought that might be a smarter way. Instead of like a Diamondback bike where you're sitting on it like so, get a bike where you're pedaling, back like so. And so I get on eBay and I found that on Walton-on-Thames, never been before, this guy was selling a bike, a recumbent bike, and I was just looking at it and I hit buy, thinking it was going to take me to the buying instructions. Well, I got an email saying, congratulations, you just spent £1,000 on a recumbent bike. Like, great. So I called the captain and was like, oh, well, I got specifications for the bike size now. And he's like, how's that? I was like, because I just accidentally bought it. Great. So I hired a van, drove down to Walton-on-Thames, picked up this new recumbent bike, I dropped it off in Lymington where his refit shop is, and they just started building the frame. And then we had it shipped to Port Denia in Spain, put onto the boat. And the view was, I was basically going to be racing him. So I had to cycle more kilometers every day than the boat sailed. And I managed it. So I ended up cycling across 15 days. I cycled 6,434 kilometers in 15 days. And I set a world record for that, the first person to bicycle across the Atlantic Ocean by way of ocean-going bike.
Wow. And how did you, or just in general, how do you prepare for these, like, mentally? I mean, when you sort of decide, okay, like when you're committed to the cause and you say, okay, I'm gonna do this regardless, like, you're gonna be raising money for the specific charity for each one of these challenges. How do you then, is it that's kind of then driving you to then make sure that that you're going to go ahead and you're going to make it happen?
That's a really good question, because it's a mix. So for me, it is the element of knowing that the net result of this experience is going to help kids and share the story about that as well. So it's not just, it's kind of humanizing the process of what charities are doing, because it gives kids a name, like Retosh, like kind of helping put good stories out there. Mm-hmm. And also, so there's the heart factor and also the fun factor, where it's play. Like, it's just so much fun getting a vision, like, and that's my process. Is I probably lose too much sleep as a result of it, but I'll have an idea and then get really playful with what does it feel like if that thing were to come to life. What does that look and feel like? What happens? Like, how are kids helped? What's media around it? Who's involved? And then once I get that really solidified in me, then I start reaching out to people. Then I look at, classical management consulting. I kind of look at gaps analysis of like, okay, I don't have that skill. Who has that skill? Call person, share vision with them, and just get a lot of people on board, because, man, I could never do any of these challenges if it wasn't for the belief and support of other people.
Yeah.
And it's just seeing these things come to life and then actually happen, because a bunch of men and women were like, we believe you can actually do that thing. And then one thing leads to another, and we're down, you did the thing. It's great.
And you've got 3 world firsts, and from what I've heard, you tried to, like, you were speaking to Guinness World Records, and there's a bit of a story behind that, right? Where they couldn't classify them as Guinness World Records, but they kind of switched it and called it world first. Yeah,
they're like, okay, you can claim them as world first, but they like, there's a really lovely woman that, her name is Jennifer, and if she listens to this, Jennifer, you're a legend for putting up with all my emails, at the Guinness Record office in London. I talk to her all the time. And she was and I submitted the details around the Atlantic Cycle Challenge, and they were like, okay, they were looking at how they can make it a record, and the decision for the Atlantic Cycle Challenge came back to, because it's something, a Guinness record has to be something that can, under fairly normal circumstances, be achieved by other people. Mm-hmm. So because that challenge, the way that it was set up, could not be achieved normally by other people, it's therefore unofficially it's not a Guinness record, but it's a world first. And I wrote back, I said, I'm not trying to be cocky about this, but are you saying it was too hard to be a Guinness record? And she came back, she goes, unofficially, yes, that's what we're saying. So, yes! So yeah, it's brilliant. But the Guinness record people are so lovely. And I'm talking with them again now about the next shenanigans that I'm looking at for September of this year. So
yeah, so this one is probably, I don't know, it's probably the wildest, like going through all the others. Yeah. This is the wildest idea out there. So you're gonna go, and this is my understanding of it. And you're gonna run. It's called the Sky Run Challenge, and you're gonna essentially run across the sky in a hot air balloon, powered by like a running treadmill, right? Is that it in a nutshell, or like?
Yeah, right, you nailed it. This is actually the first person to describe that before I described it, and I could see why people give the reaction they do, because it's ridiculous.
Because I was like, he's going to run through the sky. I was like, man, I got to look into this. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah. So how that's happened. So what I wanted to do is, I want to be the first person in the world to run through the sky, and that was kind of the pivot point, the focal point. And where that came from is when I was out in the middle of the ocean on this ship. I'm on the top deck cycling, 10, 11-ish hours a day. And I had a lot of time to think. And I was also a little bit kind of loopy in my head because, bored out there, just cycling along. And then when I was cycling, I realized in the middle of the sea that something was missing, because I didn't see any planes, and there's certainly no birds because there's nothing for them to land on. I've never been out in the middle of the ocean before. So that was one thing that really hit me. And that got me thinking of the sky, ways that we've engaged with the sky. Obviously, I was dehydrated. Like, what are things that like men and women have done in the past to kind of get human bodies up into the air? And then, and I was thinking, my mind in a delirious state, I went to, how funny would it be if you could figure out a way to power an airship by running? Must be something about that. And that was it. I remember I told some of the crew on the boat, and they were like, idiot. I was like, yeah.
This guy's crazy. He must have lost it. He's been on sea too long, right?
Yeah. So what happened? I got back. So we got to St. Lucia. Funny story about that bit as well as we needed to get the bike off of the ship, and I didn't know where to put it because the ship was chartered on to go on to other tours. And again, Matt was like, "Mate, get this bike off my boat." I'm like, "Whoa." So I go out into the Atlantic rally crossing office, and I asked if they knew of any other boats that would be keen to buy the bike. And they're like, no, probably not. But we've been watching you on social media and waiting for you to come in. If you want us to take that, we would like to actually take that bike setup and set it up here as a monument for what you just did in St. Lucia. I was like, awesome. So now I've got a monument in the Caribbean that kids can go and sit on and pedal the world's first bike across the ocean, which worked out well because I needed to get rid of it. But anyways, got to St. Lucia, made my way back to Norway. And when I got back to Norway, I called. I Googled the Civil Aviation Authority, and I got a hold of, I found this group up in Bodø, up in the north of Norway. And I called, and this woman answers the phone. And I said, hi, my name's Josh. I'm an adventurer, and what I would like to do next is find a way to power an airship by running, and I need to talk to someone about permits for that. It's just like, huh? Like, let me transfer you. I'm like, okay. So she transfers me, and she just sends me to the head of the department. So I'm speaking to the head of Norwegian Airspace, told him the same thing. He's like, I love this idea. Like, I've never had a phone call like this before. I'm like, yeah. And so he recommended I get in touch with NTNU, which is the engineering university here in Norway. Got a hold of them. It turned out I knew a good friend of mine, Frode, knows a guy that heads up engineering at NTNU because they're cousins. Put me in touch with him. Now I'm speaking with the head of technical engineering. He loved the idea. He asked to be on the vision team for it. And he put me in touch with another guy named Kevin Ford from Houston, Texas, who's an astronaut from NASA, and he used to run the International Space Station. So now I've got NASA on board on the Vision team.
Wow.
And the whole thing's just been building out. And Matt and his Refit group, Refit International out of Leamington, and the Carbon Composite, AC Marine and Composite, are now building out the prototype of the actual airship. So we're going through the regulation processes, and the view is to run it off of Preikestolen, or Pulpit Rock, if anyone Googles that. It's this really dramatic 600-meter cliff drop at the west coast of Norway. We're going to run the blimp. It'll be a blimp, like a helium-filled blimp, off the cliff to do the world's first marathon loop in the sky, and then hopefully back onto the cliff. We'll keep you posted.
And then every evening, is then going to come down, and then you kind of launch it again the following morning? How's it like?
Before, and that was the evolution of it, because what I wanted to do was cross Norway in this blimp.
Okay.
In the end, it was actually Kevin from NASA. He's like, you've done a lot of across this thing endurance challenges. He goes, check in on the fact that you're running through the sky. That's the wow factor.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to run through the sky and then cross Norway. Like, he's like, so why don't we make it like a little bit more logistically better? I don't want to say easier, because there's nothing easy about this program, but more logistically helpful, and do like a half marathon through the sky. And then Matt and I, the captain from the last challenge, we were talking about it, and we landed on, to make it understandable for people, like the world's first marathon in the sky, and at 604 meters off the ground is pretty easy to visualize. So that'll be it. So off this massive cliff, a marathon out through, it's called Lys, if you're a real dramatic Norwegian fjord, and then back out, and then the idea is to land it back on the cliff. So now I'm partnering with Oslo Marathon, the organization that runs Oslo Marathon here in Norway, and kind of creating a big program around it. So yeah, it's in the process of being built. So if I say any more than that, I'll start lying, because we're still putting the whole thing together. But it's going to happen, and looking at September.
Awesome. And between like planning and doing all these challenges, you're also doing quite a lot of speaking engagements as well, right?
Yeah, which is because virtually the world's kind of opened up. So there's been a lot of keynote talks and a lot of workshops around the work that I do for organizations.
Yeah. And with all these talks and with all these discussions with companies, and I mean, is there kind of one sort of standout bit of advice that you kind of feel like that you've learned from doing all these challenges? If someone was to do not necessarily an adventure challenge, but just, take on a new challenge in general, is there one thing that kind of hit home or has changed from you, like from the beginning to what you're doing now?
Man, that's a really good question. And I would say there is a key point that I've landed on that has been born from a couple of questions and things that come up that I recognize in myself, and that I see that I hear from other people's journeys. And that's one is like imposter syndrome is an issue that kind of cripples a lot of us, because we feel like we shouldn't be that person to go do that thing because we're not qualified enough, or sometimes giving yourself the permission to be that person to live out the dream is a bit difficult, because we have to cross that chasm between who we are now and who we want to be. And I hear these things a lot, and the way that I frame it, and I have to ask myself this on a regular basis, and that is, if my life story was a book, is it a book that I would love to read? And if I was reading that book and that person was like, oh, they had this idea, they wanted to do that thing, and it doesn't have to be crazy. It doesn't have to be pogo sticking up Mount Everest backwards. It could be anything. It could be, kayak. It could be learning to knit. Like, it doesn't matter. Whatever it is that's in our book, like, is that character, the lead character of that book, doing what we would want them to do if we were reading that book? And if that character is like, quit, if that character was like, no, that's not for me, like, the book is just, what happened? Like, so for me, I check in on that a lot. So again, if your life story is a book, is it a book you would love to read? And giving ourselves to be the permission to be the author of that story. That's a big soundbite that I love to share.
Nice. That's some good advice, man. And what's the best way of everyone to follow what you're up to, and kind of keep tabs on how the challenge is going with all the preparation? Yeah,
cool. Thanks for that. So Instagram is a big one. So just Josh Stinton at Instagram. And so I give a lot of updates on, like, updates to obviously training, but it's this one. So for this challenge, this is quite a fun one because there's obviously the Sky Run that I'm building and working with some brilliant people far smarter than me and bring this thing to life. But what I've committed to, so the charity that I'm helping for this is a group called Right to Play. And they're helping protect, empower, and educate children all over the world by using play and then help them get back to school. So I've committed to them that over the course of this year that I'm going to help them send 10,000 kids to school and get education programs, even with virtual programs now with Corona and everything else. And that's a lot of money. It's about $250,000 US to do that. And so there's the Sky Run Challenge. Donations are on the link on my Instagram bio. 100% of the money goes directly to the kids. Super, super appreciative of anybody that is willing to throw anything that direction. But in between with Instagram, I'll be updating because I'm taking on a lot of random mini challenges to keep donations driving. So this Saturday, I've organized Norway's first snow underwear run up around the lake. 5K in your underwear around a lake, and there'll be censored photos. But there's that. I'm actually writing. A dear friend of mine is a very, very successful singer and songwriter here in Norway, and she has offered to help me write a song because the idea of singing in front of a crowd horrifies me. And so I'm going to write a song with her, and we're going to go on live national television and sing the song together, with me playing guitar and singing. So that should happen here fairly soon. Just all sorts of just playful things, just to raise money for these kids. So it's a lot of fun.
Nice.
And then
good stuff. Cool, Josh. It's been great chatting to you, man. And yeah, we'll be keeping an eye on all the crazy things that you're going to be up to next couple of months. And yeah, good luck with the challenge in September when that happens. And yeah.
I truly appreciate that. And thanks for having me on this. As I said when we first talked, I said everyone involved that I've seen in the history of the Rad Season show, that you look like you just curated everyone in the world that I'd really love to hang out with. Like, this is such a great community you've got going here. So it's an honor to be on it.
Thanks, man.
Pleasure.
Speak soon. Ciao.